For those of you who have been following along with my journey, you know that I'm a bit of a blue-green villain boy. From all the time back to my first love, Iden, the last set, winning Devastator playmat, and having a pretty good PQ run, bubbling out with Kira. However, I'm done playing Control, man. What do you mean, Maddie? Kira was your girl. Boss just won a 200-person event. Why don't you want to play Control? Are you crazy? That's your style. I hear that a lot. Look, I think Control's still great. I think for a lot of people that is 100% the right call. There's a certain linear aspect to playing Control that even though there are decision trees, I think it actually can be a little more simple than some of the aggro strategies, really getting into the weeds on, action breakdown and damage numbers can be difficult in the aggro decks, in the tempo aggro decks. But honestly, the way that I'm seeing the game right now, I think aggro tempo and some of these disruptive elements are just so strong. One of the things that drew me to Control was the value proposition, playing the Vaders, playing Barrage. I think those are still really good. However, there's just so many ways to knock that deck off its game plan and really decide the tempo of the game that draws me into decks like the Quinlan that I just played, and things like Jango that I've been playing and playtesting that look really good. So short answer is I'm done playing Control, and I kind of want to talk about some of the reasons why and look at some deck lists and kind of explain my reasoning behind it, and what draws me to this new style where I think that playing aggro tempo and some of these disruptive elements are going to let me highlight my play skill a little more, and I'll go into that as well. All right, so most recently I attended a 1K this weekend, and while this was a bit of a local hang, not the biggest event in the world, so I wouldn't say, oh, look, Quinlan Tarkentown, best deck ever. I loved a lot about the deck and its style. One thing that really drew me in was I wanted to be playing a Force user with Force Throw. I wanted to be able to play things like Spark of Rebellion and Kira Unit to disrupt my opponent. This is a clip from our pod. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. But I figured this would be a good place to get the list that I ran. And I wanted to be able to present threats. And so when talking about what I want to be doing in Star Wars Unlimited, I want to be setting the pace of the game, and I want to be pressuring my opponent and kind of disrupting them a little more. One thing I found when I'm playing these Control decks is my opponent knows exactly how to play against me every time, because unless it's a mirror, I'm assuming the defensive role and they're assuming the offensive role, and I'm flipping, them away rather than the opposite. And I found that people who kind of understand the role against you right away are able to play a little tighter into you. Versus when I started playing some of these aggro tempo decks, they had a really hard time deciding, am I supposed to kill his units now? Am I supposed to race him? So, everyone talks about who's the beatdown, and that obviously changes based off a lot of factors, but people kind of assign their role properly against me. And so when playing aggro decks, and I want to draw everyone back to some of the stuff from the Sabine thread last set of Sabine versus mono yellow Oba. Sabine took a control approach. People had previously misaligned their role, and it took some detailed testing with Justin and Chrono and the other boys that are really into Sabine to realize that they were actually misassigning their role, right? So when I'm playing Control, people are getting the advantage of properly assigning their role against me, whereas with Quinlan Vos or some of these other aggro tempo decks, they might not know when they're supposed to be aggressive versus not. So the water's muddied a little bit. And what that does is it lets me use my experience with TCGs, my experience with this game, in general, my understanding of the card game to push my advantage a little more. I've noticed in the last PQ season, a lot of other decks were getting free wins that even when the writing was on the wall for my Kira deck, I still had to go through the motions, and it took a considerable amount of resources to win those games. So just pulling back to the deck list, and I mentioned it, but the cards that I really highlighted here are those disruptive elements. I mean, forced row on a stick with a force leader is just so incredible. And so I was able to present threats this weekend, get an early advantage with Tarkin Town, just like a Jango deck could, and then start to maneuver my way through matchups. I knew the Sabine matchup really well. I was able to present a pretty juicy Ezra for them to ECL into, not only getting rid of their ECL, but also finishing it off with a K2 or a Kira unit. That was a really strong play that I had identified, where maybe if they had put it down just straight, it would have taken me too many actions to deal with that K2, and they still would have had some powerful ECL plays later. And that's kind of the meaning behind the role appropriation, and also some of the aggro elements. You get Millennium Falcon, kind of that lightning bolt on a stick in a lot of matchups where you can play it late. You can even play two of them, sacking one and getting some burst damage in. I found a lot of times with this deck, I was topping out at the 5 resource play and then using 6 resources to do multiple things at once. So Quinlan Vos really kind of opened my eyes to this different play style and what I think that I could be doing with it. And so there's another couple decks that I've been play testing with that I kind of want to talk about, and just this new lens that I'm kind of looking at the game through. Because one thing I noticed with Control, and because you draw 2 cards a turn and because you can elect to resource or not, it doesn't have the same vice grip that Control has in a lot of other games. My experience comes from Magic the Gathering, all those years ago, PT Goop Grinders, getting my buddies on the Pro Tour and all that good stuff. But 2 cards a turn is just so incredible. And so especially when, a deck can decide not to resource and keep both those cheap cards to stay in the game. So because Control doesn't have that same vice grip for me, you're not really getting as much of an advantage as I would like to see. And so that's a major point. All right, so the next deck I wanted to highlight was Mono Yellow Han. Mono Yellow Han, funny enough, when it first came on the scene, we kind of didn't know why you would play it over, Mono Yellow Boba, and then kind of later in the meta had a tough matchup against Boba, but probably hand up, probably wrong there, but definitely now that those Boba's not around, this is a premier strategy, and it does a lot of broken things. And I think that one of the things that draws me to it is its ability to dictate the pace of the game. Whether it's presenting a really strong threat on the first turn, that is a 3-cost unit, or disrupting my opponent with Bodhi. The Han Solo deck says, this is what we're doing this game, and you need to come up with a plan to deal with me. From there, it has those disruptive elements that I talk about with Kira, the insane DJ tech combo that I think obviously no other deck can take advantage of that. And again, talk about disruptive, talk about powerful things, getting your opponent off a deploy or keeping them kind of locked down in a certain resource point. You're able to time lock your opponent many different ways. And so, this would fall into that disruptive combo of, if I spark their only play for the turn, if I Kira their only play for the turn, if I DJ tech them so that way they can't either deploy or play, one of their cards, I'm able to kind of effectively not let them play the game that much. And so that is, obviously a little bit of a different route than Quinlan. But it has kind of the same ethos of, I'm dictating the pace of the game, and I am kind of, the ball is in my court to mess with my opponent. And then the cool thing about this deck too that I really like is in some of the Control matchups, you just run them out of cards with Cunning, buying back cards with Tech, and some of the smuggle stuff. I wonder what other, are there more avenues to explore there? And this seems like a very malleable deck. Once you know the lines, you can assume different roles. And so it can become hard, for your opponent when you're so flexible to figure out, what role you're assuming that game. Whereas, I have all the resources to kind of pick if I'm, the control or the aggressor in a matchup, based off of my, my hand in the matchup, as a whole. So for me, this Han deck kind of encapsulates one of the really strong things you can be doing in Star Wars Unlimited. And that's really what I'm trying to get at For some people, you're going to look at this deck and it's just not going to click, and that's completely fine. I run into that quite a bit with different decks, and this one is one that's taking a little more onboarding than some of the other decks. But for me, I feel like I have the wherewithal to pilot it and hop on that horse, and so that's where I'm looking in the game. But for other people, the advice might be a very linear control strategy is the move for you. And so this video isn't to discourage that; it's just to talk about myself and my period of learning here, and use it as a lesson for everyone else. Like you should kind of, if you're not having the results you want or the enjoyment you want out of the game, maybe like re-examining, like, you aren't just a player of X deck or whatever, finding different styles that work for you. All right, and then the last deck I'm going to look at is from the recent weekend, the Birmingham 200-person event. And this is the... We're going to keep... It's Maddie channel. We're keeping that in there, baby. This is the top 4 Jango deck. I think Jango kind of encapsulates all these principles that I am, looking to talk about. The strong tempo play with Jango, tapping something down, presenting multiple threats. People are going to be able to align their matchup a little stronger into you, because it, other than some nuanced matchups, it seems, and again, I'm still onboarding, but it seems like the type of deck that assumes that, aggro role against a lot of people. But I think that the issue here with Jango's so strong that it's going to be hard for them to stop it. So I would say of the 3 decks, this might be the 3rd on my totem pole, just because it's kind of discovered, but it does all of the things that I want to do. It disrupts your opponent by tapping them down. It does really big, powerful things like cheating out units early with triple dark raid, and the quality on this is so small. Is that better? With triple dark raid or sneak attack. The heavy persuader tank I found to be a completely unbelievable game closer when your opponent tries to get you in space and you kind of pivot on them. And so, seeing the success of my teammates and the deck in general, I think it does a really good job at putting the pressure on your opponent. So when I look to update this deck, I wonder, what kind of disruptive elements other than the tap down I can add to it, whether it is Bazines or something like that, to kind of mimic some of the things that I'm looking for, or maybe the deck doesn't need it. So just kind of like, here's the thing I tell a lot of people when I talk to them about this game. Like, I go to bed pretty much every night thinking about what are the essential elements of Star Wars Unlimited, and like, how can I best take advantage of them? And I think that these disruptive, tempo-y decks completely encapsulate the ethos of the game. It's a fast-paced game. You draw 2 cards a turn, and there's resourcing, so people aren't getting locked out as much as they would in other games. And so, absent some really, powerful silver bullet type deck selection or powerful control strategies, my new lean is going to be into these strategies. I think I want to be presenting the threats, dictating the pace of the game. And I think for a lot of people who may be struggling, trying to play mid-range and control, I think maybe going down on that meta scale of upping the tempo, I think you're going to find, while it's it's not so face rolls. I mean, that's a straw man. Like, people know it's not, but people always, give less credit to these aggro decks. They're actually extremely difficult to play. And so, that's me. So, listen, Kira, I still love you. But I got new places to be, baby. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Hit me in the comments. What disruptive elements would you think would fit my play style, or what kind of decks are you leaning in? Are you an Asajj? I played against an Asajj that got me to like 21 base points really fast, and I was able to stabilize. But are there Kylo and Asajj decks that need to be brought to my attention? What are you thinking about? Let me know. I'd love to hear about it. I'm always trying to learn new ways to play the game. All right, y'all. Happy Thanksgiving.